on behalf of the Association for Parivartan of Nation, also known by the acronym APNA. APNA is a non-profit, non-governmental organization registered under the Societies Registration Act of 1860. It is run by a group of young individuals and other like-minded people who believe in working actively in order to bring a positive change in society. The foundational ethos of the organization revolves primarily around philanthropy and actions that would result in a better and just society free from bias based on gender, caste, creed, color, race, and socio-economic background. It believes in cherishing its values and in upholding them by creating a relevant plan of action that would help it achieve its goal of creating a just and sustainable society. It regularly conducts lecture series and talk sessions with prominent academicians and scholars. And today we are having a conversation with Ms. Niharika Salar, who will talk with us about approaches and opportunities to pursue LLM abroad. As an assistant professor of law at Nalsar, Hyderabad, Ms. Niharika teaches intellectual property law to undergraduate students. She has pursued her post-graduation from National University of Singapore after having done her bachelor's from NLU Ranchi. During her post-graduation, she presented her research at Hong Kong and Indonesia with respect to brands and IP law in multiple jurisdictions. She also assisted Professor Irene Kalbuli towards the Organization of Innovation Researchers of Asia Conference 2020 in Jakarta. Besides, she also had the opportunity to work with Professor Chalmers, Vice Dean of National University Singapore, on his project on the legal and regulatory framework of various South. So, ma'am, it's very interesting to know that after pursuing bachelor's from NLU Ranchi, you chose National University of Singapore to pursue your post-graduation. Why did you choose a foreign university over Indian universities, and what was the major difference that you observed?
My core idea of going overseas or pursuing my masters from a university overseas was to get global exposure. There is no denying to the fact that the kind of exposure you get when you study with a bunch of students who come from various backgrounds, from various nationalities, it really helps in widening your perspective, something which probably studying in India would not help you to. And this is something which I think one will realize the importance of only after experiencing it, right? So studying from professors who come from various backgrounds have more experiences to share, and studying with such a cohort is was the primary goal for me, the primary objective behind applying overseas. That's one. As I was also mentioning earlier, I also saw a lot of my batchmates going overseas because they wanted to use it as a ticket to work overseas and eventually settle there if they like. So if you're somebody who likes the fancy lifestyle of overseas, then you would want to work there. Then having a degree from that jurisdiction always helps. It puts you in a better position than other applicants who may have studied in India and then are, say, applying for jobs overseas. So it's always helpful to have a degree from that place. Um, Apart from this, as I was mentioning, some specializations which are offered overseas in more niche areas of study, they are more in number as compared to the specializations which are offered in India. So that's one. So, for example, at NUS, I had a whole module on something called climate change law, which I didn't know was such a happening area of law in itself. I just thought there was something called environment law and that's all. But no, environment law also, there are so many other branches, and then one entire module on just climate change law, which had more details on climate change litigation, policy, so on and so forth, which I don't think I would have been able to get in India. So those were some of my reasons why I was rather adamant on getting a degree from overseas. Yeah.
The application procedure, formalities, LORs, etc., must have been a task in itself when you were applying for the masters. Can you please tell us what should be the approach of students willing to pursue LLM abroad? Should they choose a specific subject or a general subject?
Right. So to answer your first question, as you have already mentioned, this whole process of applying and collecting your documents and drafting them can get very tedious, and it's very easy to lose your motivation down the line, and you can just be like, "Arey, kyun karna hai? Chodo, flat de denge," that kind of a thing. So first and foremost, you will have to be prepared to be in this for the longer run. Any good ideal candidate should be prepared to invest anything between 3 to 5 months to the entire application process, because your preparation starts when you start researching on the university or researching on the place where you want to study from. See, you need to understand that going overseas is a lot of money, and if you are somebody who has a lot of money to burn, good for you. But if you're somebody who will be really in with a budget, and you will be depending on scholarships, then you want to make the most out of every rupee which you have spent. So getting it from a good place is where you want to go. So researching what the university wants, what documents are required, as you already mentioned, they are the general documents which are required is the personal statement, the reference letters, your transcripts, and so on and so forth. The documents which require the most attention is the statement of purpose and the recommendation letters. The statement of purpose, in case you're not aware, is essentially a document where you try to explain to the admissions committee as to why you are the perfect candidate to be selected. Now, the word limit varies from university to university. It's anything between 500 words to 2,000 words, so around 1 page to say 2 to 3 pages, to 4 pages. Um, so it's easier said than done, right? You have to understand that there are thousands of applicants like you who are applying within those words. And the idea behind the statement of purpose is that the admissions committee does not have the time to interview each and every applicant. So the statement of purpose, that one document, is what brings out your personality. And if you can make out a good case in that document, then your application is further processed. So you understand what is the importance of the document. You want to give it good time, and therefore, my advice that you have to be consistent. It's easy to lose motivation. It's also helpful if you start early. So if the deadline is around December, it's always good to start around April, May, because you want to understand what the process is like, and you don't want to leave anything for the last, right? Um, do also remember that why I say so much of time is required for a good application. It's only because getting more comments on the document is helpful. So you want to make the most out of those 500 words. You want to answer the what, why, where question. Why are you the best candidate? What do you want to do with this particular degree? Why do you want to apply to this university? And how do you plan to use this degree in your professional trajectory? You have to explain all of this in a personal story format in those 500 words. So the best thing is that you make a draft, you come up with the first draft, then you send it out to people, and then you get their feedback and their comments, and then you incorporate those comments and then come up with the second draft. Then you send out the second draft to people. So you understand why I'm telling you that it takes a lot of time if you are serious about the application. This also helps me build up on my third advice, which is do not hesitate to seek help. So every time you think you want some comments, have a LinkedIn account, have your Gmail account or your email account, and do not hesitate to send in a LinkedIn request and a LinkedIn message that this is my statement of purpose. I am planning to apply to so and so place. Could you please go through it and help me with your feedback or your comments? Now, of course, you don't want to send it to every ANZ of the legal professional world. You want to send it to people who are relevant. So, who are the relevant people? Probably students who just graduated from that university. So, for example, if I was applying to NUS, I was looking for recent NUS graduates who are working now, because they have just been through that process and they know what it takes. So they are the best people to give me comments on my SOP. So that's about it. I mean, you just have to be consistent be prepared to be in the longer run, especially if you're a UG candidate who's applying. I mean, if you're applying for an LLM directly, then you will also be having your side hustle, your side studies, your exams going on. So it always has to be taken with the right balance. So be consistent, start early, don't hesitate to seek help, and yeah, you'll be fine. That's about it. That's the approach. And yeah, as far as your second part of the question is concerned, whether it should be a general LLM or a specialized LLM, um, in my personal opinion, I feel it's always best if you get into a specialized course, because like I mentioned, studying overseas is a lot of money, so you want to make the most out of it. A specialized degree is always considered better than a general program because it shows that you have put in more efforts to specialize in a particular area of law. And the kind of dynamic world we are living in, the demand for specialized people and just specialists in an area of law is just bound to increase year after year. Nobody, I mean, the value of a general lawyer would generally keep decreasing, and every time there's say an IP suit going on, you would want to call a specialist who knows IP law and not a general lawyer. So look at it from that perspective. So it's a very personal opinion. I remember speaking to such a person, and their reasons were that in a general LLM you're free to choose any modules that you want. So how the system works is that if you want to get a specialized LLM, you have to take in a certain number of modules of that specialized law. So if you're still very confused that you don't know which specialization you want to go to, then having a general LLM is better. It gives you a free hand to choose whatever subjects you want and then maybe decide accordingly. But yes, to answer your question, I feel a specialized LLM is always worth it if you want to go overseas. Yes.
Thank you so much, ma'am. As you've mentioned, the statement of purpose and LOR are the most important documents when you apply for a post-graduation abroad. Can you please tell us whose LOR matters the most, judges or academicians or professors?
Right. So that's a good question, actually. And you have to look at it from two perspectives. The importance of a recommendation letter will change with respect to what position you are in. So, if you're an undergraduate student who is applying for an LLM and you have no work experience, then references from your professors will matter the most. If you're somebody who has worked for say 1 or 2 years in a law firm, then at least one recommendation letter from, say, a partner of that law firm will matter the most. Now, why I say this? I hope you're aware that references are two kinds. The ones which are given by your professors are academic references. The ones which are given by your colleagues or the people you have worked with are called professional references. So, see, the whole idea of reference letters is that the admissions committee do not know you. The admissions committee needs to know that they are taking in a good candidate. They don't want to, they want to make the most of the number of candidates they take in. So recommendation letters help you in that sense. And therefore, uh, getting a recommendation letter from a person who knows you a lot is always important. So if you interned for say 1 month in some law firm, and getting a recommendation letter from that particular partner will not be helpful because that partner has known you only for 1 month. So it makes no sense. And see, understand that these admissions committee, they have been assessing these applications from years now, and they can easily make out which recommendation letter is fake, which recommendation letter was written because your chacha or your mama was somewhere in the judiciary, or kisi ne kisi ko bola. It I mean, it's not very fruitful. It may break your application. So it's always better to get a recommendation letter from a person who has known you for a longer period of time. And therefore, I say that if you're somebody who's going for a direct LLM, then getting both of your references, most of the universities, they ask for 2 reference letters. Very few ask for 3. So it's always better to get both of your reference letters from your professors who have taught you. Now, when you're in such a stage, now I'll give you my example. So I was going for my LLM directly after my undergrad, and I was also confused as to who should I get my recommendation letter from. So I got it from two professors of mine who taught me IP law modules. I was applying for an IP law specialization. So I asked my IP law professors to write me because I knew that they thought high of me, so I was confident that they will write good things in the recommendation letter. And two, they were of higher positions in the university. So of course there is the dean or the VC, whatever is in your university. Then there is a professor of law, then associate professor, then assistant professor. So it's always best to find a combination of a referee. Referee is the person who gives you the reference or writes you the recommendation letter. So it's always best to find the perfect combination of a referee whose designation looks good on paper, high designation, and who can confidently say that I have known the applicant for so and so years, and therefore I'm in a good position to assess her performance and therefore recommend that this student is nice, this student will be good for university. That sort of a thing. So of course it changes if you're somebody with work experience. If you're somebody with work experience, the ideal combination would be one academic reference from your UG university and one work experience from your current place of work. So you'll have to see where you are and then decide which set of recommendation letters would work best for you. Yeah. Also,
Okay,
just
thank you.
quick. I'm sorry. I just have
Yes,
one quick to add. I just to recall, and I thought it's always best to inform students beforehand. So a lot of referees in India, what they do is that at least the academic ones, the professors, they don't have a lot of time to write your reference letter. So they will ask you to come up with a draft. Um, and you will draft a recommendation letter, and then you will send it to the professor will approve it, and then that will be the recommendation letter. So always be prepared that the professor may actually ask you only to come up with a draft, so you shouldn't be left blank. You should have a draft in hand, and the draft of course shouldn't be very boasting, like so and so universe, so and so that the candidate is best, the candidate is first ranker, this that such koi ho hi nahi sakta. No, it has to be natural. It has to sound like you're a good potential candidate, and write it from the professor's perspective. So I'm just trying to tell you that be prepared that the professor may actually ask you only. This is what happened with me. Both of my professors asked me to write, and I had just 2 months left for the deadline, and I thought, okay, I was not prepared for this because I thought the professors will write it. So like coming up with one more draft will take around at least 1 or 2 weeks because side by side my exams and my studies. So having that in your timeline is also important, that you only may have to draft your recommendation letter. Yeah.
okay, thank you so much, ma'am. Is there any sort of integrated LLM PhD program or any dual course abroad, like pursuing masters in law and masters in public policy?
I think you're trying to ask two different things. There are integrated LLM PhD programs. I recall seeing one from City University, Hong Kong. Not many actually, because see, you have to understand that a PhD is not required by all. People do PhD out of interest, out of research interest in that particular area of law, or if they want to get into academics. Because PhD is a very long degree. I mean, a good PhD can last anything between 3 to 5 years. So having an integrated, whereas that's not the case for an LLM, right? A lot of people do LLM these days because pure graduates. I mean, with the market competition getting so tough these days, it's having a master's on your CV always puts you in a better employment position. Uh, so people doing an LLM come from a different perspective. People doing a PhD come from a different perspective. So integrating both of these courses becomes very difficult, and it caters to a very narrow audience. And hence, not a lot of universities have that. So that being said, I don't have a lot of information on it, but I do know that very few universities have it. And if you want to sign up for it, then you should be mentally prepared to be in it for the longer run, and you should be well aware of the fact that PhDs are very difficult. They are a tough degree because it's just you and your project idea for 3 or 4 years, and I mean, do it only if you think it's worthwhile. So yeah, and that's not the case for LM. LM gets over in just 1 year these days. I mean, of course, now after BCI regulations, things will change. But yeah, if you want to step into an LLM and LLM PhD integrated course, then it's better that you have thought about it. It's good if you want to get into academics. This will be helpful, or if you are really interested in that particular area of research. Yeah.
Is there any dual course as well?
What kind of dual course? I mean, I do see people applying for masters in public policy after getting a law degree. I think there are also dual courses, like for example, there's one between NYU and NUS. I think there's one between NUS and WITS Geneva, which gives you a dual LM in arbitration. So of course it's better, you get a lot of exposure. I mean you get how the system works at an Asian university, and you understand how things work at an European university. And mind you, these can be very different. I mean, legal professionals work very differently in these areas, in these parts of the world. So these kinds of dual courses, dual LLM, yes, they do exist. Of course, competition is very tough, and yeah, that's all I have to say for such dual courses. I know very little about them.
As you have already told us about the procedures and documents that we need when we apply for a master's abroad, can you please apprise more us about scholarship and exams like LSAT?
Yeah, so LSAT is essentially the law school admission test, which which categorically aims at getting admission or getting admitted to a US law school. Um, as far as scholarships are concerned, your primary resources for scholarships has to be the university help page itself. So if you're applying to say, I don't know, University of Edinburgh, then you will open up the Edinburgh's help page, the main website, and all of these universities, they have very comprehensive compilations of information which will cater to your scholarship queries. They will have a list of scholarships which is meant for certain certain students, or which is meant for certain students. I think a lot of universities also have a really good and functional search engine which just lets you put in your nationality, because a lot of scholarships are based on nationalities. It lets you put in your age and your course, because UG scholarships are different from PG scholarships, from PhD scholarships, and it will give you a list of scholarships which you are eligible to apply for. So that is one source of information which is very helpful, the main website of the university itself. Second, helpful source is your respective country's Ministry of Education website. So in India, you can just open the Ministry of Human Resources, MHRD, and you can just have a look at what are the scholarships offered by the government of India. Apart from this, you can always sign up for a lot of these external third-party websites, which act as, again, compilations of scholarships. So, for example, there's something called Buddy for Study. It's BUDDY 4, the number 4, and study, STUDY, buddyforstudy.com. They have a lot of updates on scholarships. They also have a link wherein you can join their WhatsApp group, and you will keep getting you know messages and just the general advantages of being in an informed WhatsApp group, right? Like this, there's also something called Opportunitiespedia, Opportunitiespedia, PEDIA.com. I remember they also have a link wherein you can join their WhatsApp group and you will be getting information. The whole point of scholarships is that you will have to be well informed because a lot of these deadlines are before the actual university deadline. So, for example, Rhodes closes way before a lot of university deadlines. Chevening Scholarship, which essentially caters for scholarships to study in the UK, masters, closes in October or November itself, whereas a lot of university deadlines are in December or January. So you understand because it's a very competitive process. And again, scholarships are two ways. One is merit based, one is need based. Need based, where you're trying to tell the admissions committee that you really need it because your financial background is not able to support you. And merit based is that where you're trying to convince the admissions committee that your merit is so high that you deserve this particular funding. So these are all the scholarships or rather scholarship details which will help you look for the particular scholarship which is helpful for you. Do also remember that apply to all of them. I mean, don't hesitate in staying back. I see a lot of students also going on multiple scholarships, like a little money from this scholarship and a little money for this scholarship. And then that combined amount will then help you study overseas. So that is also something which a lot of students work on. So you'll have to be proactive, you'll have to be well prepared, you'll have to be well aware, make a list of all the scholarships which you're interested in and which you're eligible for, and write their respective deadlines so that you're well prepared. So yeah, these are some of the resources which can be helpful for you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. There is a phenomenon that NLU graduates get most of the scholarships. Is there any biasness towards them, or do the students of other law students or law schools lack something?
I think I can say this that there's no biasness as such. Why I say this is because I see a lot of non-NLU grads also getting really good scholarships and getting admitted to the highest of rated universities out there. So I mean, of course, if you come from the top 3 or 4 NLUs, it does give you a good boost of confidence. It gives you a little kick, and an ideal candidate can make a lot of use of even that little kickstart. But that does not stop, or that does not mean that non-NLU grads don't get it. I mean, to understand that I can say this with confidence. I mean, I come from an NLU myself, but I'm from the newer NLUs, right? So even within the NLUs, there's a lot of hierarchy. There's a lot of like if I go for law firm internships, the top tier NLU will get a certain stipend, the other ones will get a certain stipend. So those kind of hierarchies do exist. But if you're really proactive, then you can still overcome that non NLU tag. If even that, I mean, it does exist. I will not deny it. But you can no, there's no bias as such. You just have to be proactive with the information, and just have a look at all the other candidates who went overseas to study and who don't come from NLU. Because there's a lot of them because they were brilliant themselves, they're smart, and they're able to prove that that getting into an NLU wasn't something which stopped them from working hard. So no, there's no. I don't think there's any such biasness. You just need to really work hard, and you can overcome that tag.
Thank you very much, ma'am. As you mentioned earlier about the Bar Council of India notification, the Bar Council of India has brought changes in the educational policy, scrapping 1 year LLM obtained from any foreign university is not equivalent to LLM pursued in India. What are your views on it?
I It's difficult for me to comment actually to like in favor or in against. It's very difficult that way for me. But what I can say is that I am not surprised. I In the past 3 or 4 years, um, I think this influx of Indian candidates going overseas and then coming back or to work were increased multifolds in the past 2 3 years. I think it's getting really common because, as I mentioned, um, the legal sector is getting extremely competitive, and just having a pure LLB kinds of puts you back in the race. And having it, so everyone wants an LLM now. And people are beyond the thought process that an LLM is done by people who want to get into teaching. That's not the case. People also get it for reasons, as I mentioned earlier, for global exposure, or just some more for more education in that area of law, and then go back to working. Nothing to do with academics. Still, people do LLM, and that is what is happening these days. So, so I'm not surprised why the LLM is being increased. Of course, there are pros and cons of it. There's certain audience or the certain set of people who wanted to do an LLM just because they wanted more. They wanted to get one more degree and get more information in that area of law will now protest because it's not worth 2 years. That's what they will say now. The ones who will get into academics will feel it's correct because if you want to teach somebody else, you will have to have a certain set of knowledge
Thank you
yourself,
very much,
right?
ma'am.
And
As we
let's
move
just
towards the end of this session, any parting advice for us, what law students should do or should not do? Anything?
uh, right. I think how I answered your second question was more or less what I how I want to answer your last question too, which is that start early. It really helps. It it really helps, and I say this because it does not let you affect your other professional engagements or academic engagements. Be consistent with your application. That really helps. And why I say so is also because you want to make, because see, ideally you will be making a statement of purpose for your application, then you will be making a statement of purpose for your scholarship, the scholarship essay. So how I see a lot of people getting exhausted early on in the stage, and then they don't give the most of it to the second part, which is either the scholarship or the main application deadline. So as I mentioned earlier so many times, losing motivation midway is very common. Try not to do that. Be consistent, be persistent. Uh, and as I mentioned earlier, do not hesitate to seek help. Um, so, for example, from where I come, that is my alma mater in USRL Ranchi. Before me, not a lot of people went overseas to study, so I did not have a lot of alumni to connect with. So I reached out to a lot of other people who I didn't know at all. But I was surprised that most of them were actually very willing to help me. And and that is the beauty of it. I mean, you will not realize whether the person is willing to help you before you actually reach out to them. So it's always important that you reach out to them, and whoever you have identified. And yeah, be patient. It can become very exhausting when you're done with the application, and you can be very anxious with respect to hearing back from universities whether your application was successful or unsuccessful. So just be patient. More importantly, have backups. Always have backups. You don't want to be in a situation where you thought that you will get this university or you will get this particular job. Now I'm just talking about general advice. Or you wanted this job and you didn't get it, and now you have nowhere to go. It's always better to have backups. It also makes you more confident, and yeah, network well, that helps. And yeah, that's all I had to say. With respect to even seeking help, I'm actually more than happy to even just help you in any kind of guidance you would be seeking, or any other student who will be watching this particular recording. I'm very active on LinkedIn. It's my credentials are, I mean, it's just Niharika Salar. I'm not sure if there's any other Niharika Salar on LinkedIn, because I think my surname is a little off. So yeah, just feel free to message me, and yeah,
Thank you very much. It's very nice of you. It has been
thank
very
you.
wonderful to have this session with you. Thank you very much for joining us today, ma'am.